We are blessed to have Paul here from Laurelo, Your Path to Probate, and he's going to be sharing some guidance and tips and tricks regarding the inheritance tax process and the probate process. So he'll be breaking down some myths for us. He'll be talking about inheritance tax. He'll be giving us an update, if you like, on the inheritance tax position. Not really much of an update in the grand scheme of things, but he'll be telling us about some of the cases that he sees, so some case studies. And we'll be inviting any questions. You have got a Q&A tab just at the bottom of your screen, so at any point feel free to put a question in there, and come the end of the session Paul will get round to answering all of those. The session is scheduled to run for about an hour in length. It is being recorded, so you'll have the opportunity to listen to this back after the session. With that said, I'll hand over to Paul and we'll crack on.
Okay, perfect. So Tom, am I loud and clear?
You certainly are.
Okay, perfect. Right, well, obviously, good morning and thank you very much for attending this webinar this morning, and a belated Happy New Year to everyone. So as Tom's kindly mentioned, I'll just be covering off the basic rules of inheritance tax. I would generally hope that this would be certainly within your knowledge scope itself, but certainly covering off really where we get to see something slightly different from probate practitioners, from the family's point of view, with what their perceptions are, and certainly doing some myth busting within the industry. Please, at the end, I'll be inviting any questions, and for those of you who know me, I'm always there available to help support. Our ethos is about education, so you can pick up the phone to me, email me, correspond with me as much as you like. All right. So for those who don't know me, my name is Paul Radcliffe. I've been in the industry now, it's actually over 11 years. I have worked predominantly in the corporate market for the largest 3 probate providers in the UK. I've come away from the corporate market through personal reasons to deliver what I believe is a world-class service for families. I've seen over 4,000 families in just over a decade. So we've had some extremely proud moments in 2022. So Laurelo scooped the Probate Provider of the Year at the British Wills and Probate Awards. We appeared in the Daily Mail, and we have a great deal of association with funeral directors, industry, and their governing bodies. So I always like to put a bit of a background behind any topic that I'm covering, and anyone that's been on a webinar before will see this regular slide. But approximately, there's about 600,000 people pass away every year, and around 300,000 families need probate. So the rationale behind that, of why it's approximately half, is because you have a hell of a lot of first deaths within husband and wife and husband, and civil partnerships, and because the assets are held jointly, they go over automatically without the requirement of probate. There's many experts in the industry that will supply families with trust advice, and quite commonly that can bypass probate. And ultimately, if the individual's wealth is under a certain threshold, then that doesn't require probate either. So that's where we sit with that figure. But out of those 300,000 families, approximately 80% of the population end up using a professional in one capacity or another. And around 25,000 families had to pay inheritance tax at 40%. So again, just covering off some industry timescales and updates for yourselves. The guidelines and the averages haven't particularly changed in the decade that I've been in the industry. So it's quite common knowledge that the industry average is 9 months for a non-taxable estate for a full administration, 15 months average for a taxable estate. This is where we get this phrase, the executor's year, because again, certain experts in the field have suggested that on average an estate can take a year to administer. Now, due to delays with COVID, that was increased We're delighted to say at Laurelo we are considerably lower than this. An example I can give is we did an estate that was in excess of £1 million, an inheritance tax estate that we did a full administration process. We took it on right at the start of May, and we have just done our final accounts last week. So just for your knowledge, if the families are doing a probate application and there is a will involved, irrespective of whether it's taxable or non-taxable, the timescales have come down with the courts. So we are now looking anywhere between 6 to 10 weeks turnaround. Unfortunately, on intestate cases, so families that have not got a will, the guidelines that we've been given by the courts are anything up to 20 weeks. So again, when you're passing on this information and helping and supporting families right at that early stage, it just really hits home again the benefits of people having wills. It's considerably different in timescales at the moment. So we'll start with the basic rules. Hopefully this will be bread and butter for yourselves. But ultimately, when you die, your wealth is calculated. It's your net wealth. And if your net wealth is more than your allocated allowance, then you have to pay tax on the surplus. Most common tax is currently at 40%. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but generally, as I said, there was 25,000 families or estates that had to pay 40% tax. But every individual has an allowance, and this is an automatic allowance, which is currently set at £325,000, and this is known as your nil rate band. So probate requires you to value the entire estate, and it also includes worldwide assets. But please bear in mind, and we come across this as probate practitioners a great deal, where the family will inform us there's only £200,000 in a bank account and there's £50,000 in shares, so the estate is £250,000. But ultimately, once we do some investigation, we then find out, and it's divulged to us, that there's potentially gifts that have been given. So if any gifts have been given within the last 7 years, they need to be factored in and calculated for probate purposes. We sadly come across a very regular misconception that you gift a property and you continue to live in that property. Well, that comes under a failed gift. So we have to then recoup the entire value and place that onto a probate application. And then there is taper relief rules, and taper relief rules only come into large gifts. But ultimately, that process alone can be confusing. So it's important that we put our cards on the table, we explain to the families and the executors that we're dealing with, and they understand why we need this information. Because I probably do not go a week without a family, not intentionally, but giving me incorrect information. So as I explained, the nil rate band is automatic. Everyone is entitled to that, and you do not need to claim this. But then there are further thresholds if you meet the criteria. So the first one I want to talk about was the deceased a widow? Did the widow's estate pass to the surviving spouse? And if the answer was yes, you now have an option to claim the predeceased nil rate band. And this is known as the transferable nil rate band. So if the individual's allowance is £325,000 and the predeceased spouse's allowance was £325,000, at this stage, as long as you meet that criteria and it's approved, the estate now has £650,000 tax-free. The next common allowance that can be claimed is known as the residential nil rate band. Now, this was an allowance that came out in 2017. So the estate can claim if the following criteria is met. So is the property valued more than the allowance, or was there evidence it was sold because the individual had to go into care? And the beneficiaries must be the children, grandchildren of the deceased. But unlike the rules of intestacy, they can be stepchildren. So if all the criteria is met, then a further £175,000 allowance can be claimed. And then following the same rules as the nil rate band, there is a transferable residential nil rate band. So this entitles the estate to therefore claim the deceased's £175,000, the deceased £325,000, and the predeceased's £325,000 and £175,000. Assuming that all the criteria is met, you can then claim a £1 million tax-free allowance for that particular estate. In order to claim the residential nil rate bands, it is a completely different process. It falls into the top category of the IHT 400. So the process is lengthy, the costs are greater, but the rewards are there. And absolutely, if a probate practitioner and via correct advice, we can claim a non-taxable estate, then we absolutely will do. So please note a slightly controversial rule, but the inheritance tax has to be paid within 6 months. Now, there are lots of methods in which that inheritance tax can be paid, and HMRC will allow you certain payment options. They will allow you to talk to them, but interest is charged. If you miss the deadline, they are also allowed to give financial penalties. Currently, my understanding on the latest budget is the interest rates are up to a maximum of 6%. So just in summary on inheritance tax, although there are more allowances than this, the majority of the population will fall into these 4 categories. Every estate, £325,000. If you're a divorcee, single person, and the estate goes to your children, then you can get £500,000. If the predeceased spouse's allowance was allowed to be passed over, but the beneficiaries are not the direct children, then you can claim £650,000. And if every single criteria has been met, you can claim up to a maximum of £1 million. So please note that between spouses, there is no inheritance tax liability. So I'm married. If I was hit by a bus and I was fortunate enough to have won the Euro Millions the day before, then my wife can inherit that tax-free. If there's any monies to charities, political parties, there's no inheritance tax liability. If you gift more than 10% of your estate in your will to charity, then you do get a slight reduction on the inheritance tax bill. And there are allowances which can be exceptionally complex for businesses and farms and land and woodland. We won't be covering these off today under the basic rules of inheritance tax. But please note, if there is a vastly wealthy estate, estates that are worth more than £2 million, then there is a reduction in the residential nil rate band, which is a calculation that is done. It reduces by £1 for every £2 you are over that amount. So if, for example, an estate was worth £3 million, they would not be entitled to claim the residential nil rate band. So what we want to be able to make any of our partners and anyone that comes onto a webinar aware of is, what do we actually get told, or what questions do we get posed when we're dealing with a probate administration? And these are not just one-offs, these are regular statements that we hear from families. So I get the allowances automatically, don't I? Well, absolutely not. Every family or every individual is only entitled to the £325,000. If you do not claim your allowances correctly, then HMRC will base that, and the courts will base that application that you just have £325,000 allowance. Over the years that I've been working in industry, I have sadly come across families that have claimed the incorrect allowance, and it is, I won't say impossible, but it's very, very difficult to get a retrospective application done. Exceptionally common. It's more than 7 years. I don't need to talk about it. Well, we need to delve a great deal deeper, because sadly, failed gifts happen very, very regularly. The most common one that we keep on coming across is, yeah, we put the property into son or daughter's name 10 years ago, but we carried on living there until the day we passed. So every gift receives taper relief. So we're really, really happy that the gift was given 6 years ago, so it's significantly reduced. The gift in its entirety comes back into the estate unless the gift is over £325,000. So it only receives taper relief on if it's exceeding the nil rate band. Okay, so I've just got a question. If I could kindly answer the questions at the end, but I promise I will go through all the questions here. Okay, rebates are automatic, so you're required to make the payment of inheritance tax within 6 months from the date of death, and that can be very, very difficult in terms of we greatly have monies invested in items that fluctuate, properties, stocks and shares. So by announcing that the estate is worth X, you're obeying the law, what the requirements are, you pay the tax on that, but by the time you come to actually encash the estate has come down, and certainly that would be something that we've been experiencing over the last few years within the industry. And you, as long as you meet the criteria, you are entitled to then claim a rebate from HMRC. Here's a very interesting one. Rebates have to be given back. HMRC have strict guidelines in terms of timescales, and ultimately, if we were taking on a probate application, we would want to be speaking to a HMR case manager to understand what timescales are in place. Will we have an extension? So the family is fully made aware. We had a very interesting inquiry that was asking us for a kind of, you know, a second opinion, in effect, that they had they paid tax on £1 million worth of stocks and shares. The stocks and shares have reduced by £200,000, but the process that they had taken to do the administration, which they were doing themselves, took over 3 years. So in theory, they were entitled to £80,000 tax back. However, HMRC currently have given a response that they've missed a deadline and they're not going to be receiving that £80,000 back. Within stocks and shares, unit trusts, on the IHT forms, it explains that unless they've been given an extension, that they have a year to claim the rebate. So they will not charge me interest or fine me. Absolutely, that is not the case. We see families receive regular fines, and certainly the interest will be accrued. So when they're calculating the inheritance tax, they will be calculating that in the background. And then the final one is they won't question the market valuations that I've submitted. But again, it's HMRC and the probate courts are allowed to question and audit anything they wish during this process. So commonly, if they're not satisfied, they are allowed to ask for independent district valuations. So I've covered off this case study on a previous webinar, but I thought it's very apt for the session that I'm doing now. This was something that we had a few months back. So the scenario was that Dad passed away, leaving a will. The entire estate went to his son. The estate was worth an estimated £700,000. The deceased was widowed, but the predeceased spouse's allowance went to her son because this was a second marriage. So the family were initially told by 2 solicitors and 1 large corporate firm that they would only get £500,000 tax-free. So that would make sense. However, after we investigated, this was his second marriage, so we investigated what had happened to the first wife. Sadly, she had passed, but her entire estate went to him. So we were allowed to claim the £1 million allowance on the first wife. So we took her allowance rather than the second wife. And then we've had a much more recent case study where Dad passed away, leaving in a will. The entire estate went to 3 children. The estate was worth an estimated £500,000. The deceased was divorced and he was living in a flat worth £125,000. Well, going back to the residential nil rate band, you can only claim the residential nil rate band up to the value of the asset. So in this case, yeah, in theory, it would see on paper as it would be £125,000 for the property, £325,000 for the nil rate band. So 2 professionals stated to the family that they would receive £450,000. After we've done an investigation, we spoke to HMRC and we got it authorised that through the divorce settlement that the marital home had a much greater worth, and we were allowed to actually claim the residential nil rate band against the ex-marital home. So we got that we got the estate £500,000 tax-free, and the estate ended up being tax-free. So that's the end of the basic rules of inheritance tax, with some of the misconceptions and myths that we hear within the industry. I just want to finish up by just letting people know really what have I heard from families that has been a regular feedback within the industry that really inspired me to come away from the corporate conveyor belt and join a family firm that wants to offer that world-class service. So the common feedback that I used to receive was families were left confused. They really had a great deal of lack of transparency in the industry, certainly over disbursements and fees. Communication could be slow or poor, families would have to chase. The actual process of probate, why does a probate application take 15 months? What has caused that rationale for it to be, that length of time? Families were left feeling unhappy and disappointed. They didn't know what the other options were, or they're certainly confused by other options. Families were forced to use a solicitor or probate specialist as they named them as executors, so they weren't given any alterations or other options. And they didn't feel there's any rapport or compassion. So we can't change the industry, but we certainly do what we can to educate not only our partners, but families out there. So about Laurelo, so it's a family-owned probate specialist firm. All we do is probate. Our in-house team have got multiple years of experience behind them. We offer a personal face-to-face service, so we'll go out and see every family within England and Wales face-to-face to educate them, allow them to understand what is ahead of them within the probate process choices, and we want to alleviate that confusion that the industry has before they make an informed choice. We'll give them regular updates, and we'll absolutely give them transparent billing, fixed fees, and no hidden costs. What will we offer our introducers? So we'll offer you support, advice, staff training. We are available 24/7. We have regular agreed communication updates with partners. We'll protect your brand. We'll treat you as if we're as one. We will always pass back reciprocal business because we only do probate. You'll receive 20% fee share of the net probate fee, and all fee shares are paid within 48 hours of Laurelo getting paid. So just highlighting again what we will give that family. So once consent is given, we'll make a call to the family just to introduce ourselves. We will then offer a free home consultation to explain what probate is, explain what their options are, and identify whether the family needs our help, but allow them to make that clear and concise decision. And the family will absolutely get a dedicated caseworker. They have the same individual who's seen them on day one, will be the same person that's doing the work all the way through. They have a UK telephone line that they can contact for any advice or support, frequent updates, total transparency, speedy service, and they will know on day one what the fixed fee is. So I'll leave up my contact details there, and I'll just then return to the question and answer session. Okay, so right, so I've got a question. The inheritance tax, when is the inheritance tax 6 months due? That's from the date of death. Okay. What I would really be comfortable with, if it's okay, because we've got quite a few questions that have appeared on the question and answer. If it's okay with everyone, we've got a list of attendees. If I can just take a bit of time rather than just ad hoc answering these questions on the end of this webinar, I will ensure that I get a detailed answer against every question and send it out to all attendees. So again, please, if you've got any questions or you know, anything for me, you can either email me direct and I can add it to the update that will go out today, or please add it on the question and answer list. And again, my promise to everyone here is you will get the detailed answer, and then it will go to everyone as well out later on. I hope that's okay with everyone. Okay, so if I come back to you then, please, Tom.
No problem at all. So what I will do, Paul, is I've just taken notes of all the questions that we've got, so that we can go back and answer those. I guess if any, we'll leave the chat open for a couple of minutes, so that people can put any additional questions and things that they want to in there. So anything about the topics that have been given. Otherwise, I think that's probably everything from your point, Paul, is it?
It is, yeah. I just want to thank every attendee that's taken time out of their day. It's, you know, we just really appreciate the engagement that we have here at Laurelo, and whether it's on the question and A, whether it's separate, you know, please do utilise us to be able to ask these questions and queries, and we'll get the answers out to you. And if anyone wants to speak to me on an individual basis, certainly anyone that knows me, I'll go out my way to try and help and support partners with the queries. And the one thing that we really shout from the treetops is we want to come away from, you know, Laurelo is a probate professional company that will only help families when probate's required. Not at all. You know, we are an advocate of education, so families, while they're alive, they might have questions and queries about probate. Please, you know, utilize our skill set to have a 5-10 minute chat with that family. We're always welcome to help and support and add value to your business. It's not just as cut and dry as is probate required. Yes, okay, well, Paul and the team can help at Laurelo. I help multiple families, mainly on bereavement, but multiple families when probate is not required. So, you know, it is just putting that offering out there that we don't have a barrier.
You were working, if I could jump in on that, Paul, you were working with one of our clients recently, weren't you? And they said they sent me a message because I said that they should speak to you about a possible case that they've got. And you spoke to the family, and I think in that case probate wasn't required, but they felt much better for having had a conversation. They felt like there was a clear path as to what they understood, and they knew what was expected now moving forward. And my client was eternally grateful for that. So thank you.
Absolutely, and it's something that, you know, we work as one, and I would love, you know, Laurelo to have hundreds and thousands of reviews out there, but actually what I tend to do, and it just again adds value to your service, is when an inquiry comes through, I'll happily take 5, 10, 15 minutes out of my day to help and support that family, and the added value is I commonly get asked, do I have to pay anything now? You know, thanks very much for that. And my honest answer is to them is, you got referred to me by Steve or by Sam. Just put a review on for them about how well you felt that you've been looked after. And it really just goes so much more than a standard relationship. We want to protect your brand, and we're just an extension of that.
Final question from me, if I can, Paul. So there's a few people on the call who might be new to Laurelo. What do they do in terms of getting onboarded and speaking to you about instructing their first cases?
Yeah, so it really is, as you would expect with any third-party relationship, there has to be a consent. So it is, you know, that family, if that family wants to speak to Laurelo, we've just got to have that clear consent to make contact. But please, if you are you know, thinking of either swapping, or you don't have a probate provider, or you'd just like to know some more information, please just speak to me. We, you know, yes, there are partnership agreements in place. We base a lot of our business on trust. We're very active on social media. If we let anyone down, it would just, you know, stand out like a sore thumb. So, but please, yes, speak to us about working with us. We'd be really happy with that.
So just to recap, there's been a couple more questions that have come through on the Q&A. We're going to send around a round robin email to all delegates later on answering those questions. Is that right? Absolutely correct. Yes. Perfect. We'll give it one more minute, shall we, just for anybody who's got any final questions about the session, about the content that Paul's put in place today, any of the case studies, and I guess also about any cases that you've got ongoing at the moment that you perhaps like a little bit more assistance with. I'm sure Paul can provide some guidance on those sorts of things too. So we'll give another minute for you to put your questions into the question and answer tab, and then we'll draw the session to a close. If you have got no further questions, then feel free to depart and get on with the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
I thank everyone again for attending.